Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Welcome, I'm Ross Lauder, your host from Single Focus Talent, and I'm joined by our non-exec director, John Quigley, today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Today, we are joined by Mark Rudden, the head of EMEA for Browserstack. I'm very excited to have Mark on the podcast today. Mark has really written the book around hiring plan, and for me, typifies the ideals of fail to plan, plan to fail. So I wanted him to take us through what that looks like on today's call. Welcome today, Mark.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I know we've been in contact throughout your career through various different interactions, and I wanted to share with our listeners, if you would, how you've arrived at where you are in your career thus far to date. What were the decisions you took in order to make each of those respective moves, and why, as it were. So maybe take us through your career thus far in SaaS technology, and specifically in sales, and where it's brought you to now.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, like a lot of people, early part of my career can be best described as miscellaneous. I think I graduated into the recession in Ireland, or just before that, and obviously everything changed a lot for graduates in that time. So when I look back at my career, I did a lot of things. Work in college and work after college, that at the time didn't really make a huge amount of sense, but looking back at it now, it kind of makes a lot of sense that I've ended up where I am now. A lot of those things, working, organizing events, working, doing some sales, working, doing some recruitment, all of those kind of things have kind of led me to technology sales. So I'm probably about 15 years in sales, about a little over half of that in the SaaS space. So I think I worked in a startup website in Ireland. I did some door-to-door sales. I ran events. I was involved in festivals. I did a lot of different things, straight out of college. And 2009, 10, 11, there was a lot of people leaving Dublin, leaving Ireland, and opportunities weren't exactly rife. So it was really about kind of doing whatever it took to survive. And luckily, when you're that age, you don't need a huge amount to survive, so you can take a lot of risks. So yeah, I mean, after that, I got involved in the retail bicycle trade, selling bicycles into companies. Obviously, the government tax-free bike scheme was really kicking off, and I got involved in a couple of bike stores and selling bikes commercially into offices and training and all of that kind of stuff. And that kind of led me to a point where I really didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. So I took off and did some traveling, ended up in South America and a few other different places. And then when I came back to Dublin, this would have been 2011, 2012. It was really kind of the only show in town was technology. We're kind of pretty deep into the recession at that point. And I'd sold bicycles to Google and Facebook and Yahoo and Oracle and a lot of these different places. So I just used that network to find connections and try and get a foot in the door. I also realized that a lot of my early career, while I'd been somewhat successful and earned a living, I knew myself I could I needed some training, and I needed some structure, and I needed mentoring, really. So I interviewed with a number of different technology companies, and I ended up with Salesforce, and they weren't a company that I'd necessarily heard of before, because they were in the B2B space, and unless you were familiar with technology, you kind of knew the Googles and the Facebooks of this world and the Amazons, but you didn't necessarily know Salesforce. So when I spoke to them, I had 3.5 great years at Salesforce. It's almost like a bachelor's in SaaS. I kind of think of it in that way. But the difference was that when I interviewed with them, they had a plan for me. They kind of recognized where I was at. I actually interviewed for an account executive role, and they said, "Well, you've considerable sales experience. For your age, you don't have any technology experience." So I ended up in a BDO role, and much like some previous people on this podcast, and kind of grew from there. I went through 3 different roles in as many years, and then I think what happened then was I was used to working in smaller organizations, and Salesforce was growing at that stage. Was almost doubling in staff every year at that stage, and I think with some reflection and some thought, and talking to some people who were kind of unofficial mentors at the time, I realized that I actually wanted to get back into a smaller organization, a faster moving organization. I know that's a strange thing to say, because Salesforce is a very fast moving organization, but I came to realize that actually I'm drawn towards more chaotic situations rather than political situations. And as a company gets bigger, the chaos reduces as process increases and people get more specialized in their roles. And large companies don't like chaos. But what you get often when chaos is removed is you get politics. And I found that quite frustrating. So the goal then was, I remember going on holiday with my now wife, and kind of talking it out and talking it through, and we both kind of came to the same realization that I needed to go to somewhere that was much smaller, where I could have more of an impact, but also that the experience would be a little bit more diverse. And it was kind of like getting off the motorway and getting onto the back roads. Was the way that she put it at the time. And so yeah, I spent a lot of time looking around in 2015. I think I ended up writing a piece on LinkedIn about it a few years ago, because I think when you leave a place like Salesforce and you've good experience, in 2015 there's companies landing, IDA-backed companies landing in Dublin on a quarterly basis. I think I interviewed with 14 different companies that summer, and it's almost, I think everybody just saw Salesforce on a CV and said, "Yeah, we'll interview you," and the training, the foundation you get in all of the core competencies of sales at Salesforce is world class. So you're kind of a safe bet going into a smaller company. But I couldn't really see the wood from the trees, so I ended up kind of again taking some time to think about it, and talking to the people around me, and I came up with a scoring system almost for all the companies I was interviewing with, and they were the 3 Ps. And anyone who's worked with me in the last 5 years is truly sick of me talking about the 3 Ps. But I think there's it was a product that you'd sell your family at full price, because you knew it did what it was supposed to do, and it generated value. Wow. It was people that you wanted to, not only that you wanted to work for and with and respect, but like people you genuinely wanted to spend time with. That you weren't looking at the clock to run out, and you weren't not everybody. You don't have to get out of bed every morning wanting to go to work, but more days than not, you need to want to go in there. And then thirdly was progression. if I thought about a career block of kind of 2 to 4 years, could I go through the kind of progression that I felt I was capable of, and would this place give me the opportunity to do it? And typically, if the product was good and the people were good, market was good, those opportunities would arise. So I spent 4.5, little over 4.5 years at Reich. Was the first sales hire in EMEA, and fortunate enough to work with a great product, some amazing people, and see the office scale from 4 people with laptops on cardboard boxes to the office that they have at Charlemagne today, which is a fantastic space full of fantastic people. And then I think, when you think about kind of chunks in your career, I always thought about the SaaS journey in 3 parts, and it was kind of it was learn the basics at a world-class institution, go somewhere where you were in early and you put the foot down, and the majority of people ended up getting hired behind you, and kind of propelling your career forward in that sense, and then going and taking an industry leading, market leading product, and doing the same journey again, but doing it from the director's seat rather than from the first rep seat. So I, very, very fortunate to have that Browserstack came calling kind of at the end of last year, and I joined them in January, and I suppose the journey for the next 3 to 5 years is to scale the EMEA operations to a similar level.
I suppose, when I think of you as a very project orientated guy. You take on a project. And I remember one thing you said to me a number of months ago, which was, I spent my teens working on bicycles. I spent my 20s working on cars, and I'm now spending my 30s working on companies. And I think that very much speaks to your kind of approach to problem solving, tinkering, process engineering, etc. And I'm very keen on the people skills, because I know you went from BDR to account executive to very much being in a people leadership position. You mentioned a little bit earlier on the call around door-to-door sales. And very much selling bicycles to big tech companies, which kind of typifies the interaction and people skills required for leadership. Maybe would you just take us through some of your philosophies around leadership there? Obviously, you're managing a diverse group of people. You've got young, hungry guys. You've got more tenured, experienced guys. Maybe you could just share with us some of your philosophies around people leadership, getting the most from an organization, and seeing some of those successes I know you've shared with me on prior conversations we've had.
I think I'm very fortunate to have worked with some really great leaders, and I suppose been around some great leaders, not necessarily kind of working with them as well. And I think the leadership is one of those things that you can. It comes in many different forms, and everybody has their own take on it and their own brand of it, I suppose. And one person's kind of thought process on it won't necessarily sit very well with another person, because it's kind of very personality and persona based, I think. But there's a couple of kind of fundamentals that were kind of instilled in me pretty early on, and that was kind of having respect for people around you, and most of all treating people the way that they want to be treated. So I think a lot of times when I sit in interviews and you really kind of peel back the layers and you understand why somebody wants to leave an organization. And the old adage that people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. And a lot of the time you get people who necessarily don't feel supported, or don't feel that their boss has their back, or their manager has their back. And I think there's a lot of the further we go into this this SaaS revolution, it's 20 years old now, but the further we go into it, the more science and data driven it becomes. And I think because of that, it becomes more and more important that people managers remain human. And because of that, I think, I remember setting out my first kind of people management role would have been, technically my first people management role was managing underage football teams in college, but
Sure.
but I think my first paid people management role, I remember distinctly thinking at the start of it, oh, I want to try be the manager that I wish I had. And because of that, it kind of just led me in this direction where, if people weren't at the right standard, or if people weren't doing the right thing, or if the quality of an email or a call or a proposal or whatever it is wasn't at the right level, it was kind of it just became very important to make sure that the feedback was kind of on a human level. And I think when people understand that you genuinely want the best for them, you can actually give them much more direct feedback, and feedback that would in other circumstances be considered a little bit kind of, I suppose, tough love is the way of thinking about it. So I think I'm fascinated with different forms of communication and with leadership, and I think I wouldn't consider myself an expert on the topic, but having read enough about it and spent enough time around groups of people and trying to understand the group dynamics and what drives them and all of that kind of stuff, the further I get into it, the more I'm convinced that it's that kind of almost kind of unwavering support for the team, that they kind of, people really buy into that, and you kind of can't fake that. So I think when I think about people management in those ways, it's it's kind of just people first. And if you think about the way that our companies are structured these days, it's like, the sales teams deliver numbers to the business, but really kind of the way I think about it is, I look after people and people look after customers, and then customers look after numbers. And if I skip any one of those bits, I'm kind of missing the point. And especially in a subscription model business where, every year the customer has a choice to make. And the vast majority of contracts are still 12 months. So you really, if you don't set out with that customer success mindset, which is absolutely the way to go, you're going to have serious churn problems. But if you think about it, if you don't set out with an employee success mindset, you're never going to get to the customer success part in the first place. So I think what people who've worked with me in the past would say that, one, he doesn't ask us to do things that we haven't seen him do himself. And I think more and more leaders kind of can hide behind dashboards, and cannot get rolled up the sleeves and get stuck in. And luckily, I very much enjoy the sales process, the sales cycle, the stakeholder management, and especially the getting creative around contracts and doing the negotiation part. I think no matter kind of where my career goes, if I stay in sales, I want to have some sort of connection to the front line. But I think if your people, if you're asking them to do things that they see you do on a at least semi-regular basis, you're an awful lot more credible. And I think when the shit hits the fan, and more often than not it does, especially in a chaotic kind of more startup environment where things are a little bit less mature in terms of process and a little bit more chaotic in terms of where everybody has to spend their time. When shit does hit the fan, there needs to be, unwavering support for the team.
So, Mark, in terms of those people, and the Browserstack is in the category, or is considered a hypergrowth company, right? And hypergrowth companies are companies do in excess of 40% compound annual growth in revenue year on year. I'm sure you guys are way past that. So, with that really fast upward trajectory, my question is. And obviously, they that's because they have a really good product, a really good solution at various levels from B2B to enterprise. Can you win solely by being in a growth industry with a great offering, or is your success dependent on having A players on the team?
I would say you can have some sort of success if your product is shit hot. I mean, I've certainly seen over the years, seen non-A players deliver results that would in other companies be A-class results. And I think the old adage at Salesforce was always, timing, territory, and talent, and in that order.
Yeah. Is that those guys you saw hitting the number? Is that a classic case of the territory doing the number and not the guy?
No. I think it'd be oversimplistic to say that, but all of these things, there are a ton of different variables in this. Obviously, as a sales professional, you want to be in the right market at the right time, and I think the amount of movement in in SaaS sales professionals from company to company every year kind of would the kind of the rate of change and people changing companies would suggest that people are looking for that hot streak a lot. I think there's I've been very lucky, extremely lucky to be at Salesforce at the right time, to be at Reich at the right time, and hopefully now at Browserstack at the right time. And it is definitely possible to hit a number in a company that is on fire, without necessarily being an A player. The really interesting thing, though, is when you get an A player at the right company at the right time, and that's where you get the exponential results. And that's not doing your 105, 108, 111% of your year. That's doing multiples of your year. And so I think it's a lot of companies who have that hot streak. Everybody wishes they had more A players, but the reality is that it just doesn't work like that. So when things are really, really firing, you can get B players to do A player numbers, and that's just the way it goes. I mean, it quite literally is, being in the right place at the right time.
Sometimes that's not accidental. A lot of organizations see success and growth because they pick the right markets. And I'm wondering, how do you guys decide what markets you should go after, whether it's financial services and have there been any times where you've got it completely wrong, and what did you do? So I suppose the question is, how do you decide what markets you should operate in, because not all markets operate equally. So when you're in the kind of go-to-market planning phase or phases, how do you guys decide, or I'm curious, how do you decide what markets to go after?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the when you think about what we do, it's that kind of blend of art and science, and the go-to-market stuff is pure science. It has to be incredibly data-driven. So a lot of that, kind of lucky enough to have qualifications in economics and have a decent understanding of the numbers and the probabilities and statistics that go with territory planning and market planning. And especially when you're looking at a really complex market like EMEA. I mean, I think one of the early discussions with Browserstack was all about, well, explain how you think about EMEA. And if you think about the US, you think about a time zone of 3 hours. Everyone speaks English and everyone spends in dollars. And then you look at EMEA, and at best you can narrow it down to 6 regions, but oftentimes you've got many more. So I think the the go-to-market in the EMEA context is a fascinating topic, just because there's so much diversity in there, and the banking and finance sector in Paris is very different to Frankfurt, even though we live in this highly global connected world. Decision making is reasonably different. So I think to answer your question, I think when you think about where are you going to spend your time and effort, there's an initial very fast process of, okay, well, who uses our product, where do they get most value for it, and what industries and companies have the highest propensity to spend on this stuff. And then when you go deeper into it, that really happens more in a country by country mode. So you could go from a planning session into the DACH territory to a planning session into Southern Europe, and the approach can be a little bit different. The marketing strategy can be different. The way we spend money might be different. So I think it's we could do a podcast series on that topic just alone, but I think there's very much data driven, and again, I think sales professionals and sales leaders especially, a lot of the ones that I would have in my network in Dublin that are doing particularly well at the moment are people who have kind of really spent time to understand the data, and to not just understand the data that they're given to digest, but also to be able to go back and interrogate that data in a really kind of meaningful way. And I think I was really lucky at Reich that when I started having to do these kind of more deeper looks into, and this comes on to what Ross said earlier on about kind of hiring plans, when you're trying to understand like where are we going to go and be successful, the natural conclusion of that then at the end of that is hiring the people that are actually going to execute that go-to-market strategy, and working with some really, really smart analytical people at Reich was a huge learning curve for me in terms of understanding the cause and effect of going after different regions and what that meant at a strategic level, and then at a tactical level, and then just at an operational level. How do we kind of make sure that we close the loop on that? So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, I couldn't agree with you more on understanding the growth drivers of your organization and then aligning the talent to those, because honestly, some companies get that so wrong. It's unbelievable. They have guys that are pretty adept at selling into healthcare, for example, or they have those guys selling into financial services in a different country where they have a natural language, and there's just so many mistakes I've seen. But I would completely agree with you there in terms of whatever the growth drivers are of the organization, aligning the talent with those growth drivers.
Yeah, I think what Ross, what we probably spoke about before, probably a number of years ago, is specifically understanding, when you're trying to deliver a plan that is asking for north of 60% growth, it's obviously that the headcount plan is kind of it's the cherry on the cake. So it's kind of like all of the different pieces from the marketing, the marketing plan for the region, the product roadmap, the execution of all of these different pieces
Yeah.
only really comes into play if you get the headcount plan right. And my experience is that a lot of companies wait until the revenue is right there in front of them before they hire. And it's obviously trying to hiring into that gap and making sure that people are ramping on time and hitting their ramp on time is kind of the critical part. And I think that's I think that the team at Reich did a fantastic job of that through 2016, 17, 18, adding people into the team at the right time so that the territories were well aligned. And often what happens in kind of fast growing startups is that you're adding customers or adding accounts or building, the demand generation team are building lead flows faster than you're hiring. So what happens is, reps get saturated in leads and or accounts, and go into more of a one is to many playbook, where they can't cover every account and they can't really kind of understand the needs of a lot of customers, and they end up, but they're from a financial point of view, they're very successful. And this kind of this leads you down the line of reps who are successful, full of confidence, and think that they're doing very, very well, when actually their learning curve is flattening all the time, because the fruit is getting lower and lower to pick. And then when you hire in on top of that, you kind of snap back the other direction and you hire in on top of that. What you're doing then is you're pulling fuel out of these places, and there's a shock to the system. Maybe the enablement hasn't kept up, and you just upset the balance in the sales org, because we've now seen real tangible proof that we need more reps, when actually going back and having it, a really robust data model will be able to show that we need to hire ahead of this. And I think one of the things that I really struggled with in 2016 was okay, I either seem to always have too much territory or too little territory to distribute among the team, and a bunch of us got together and just said, how are we going to solve this? And the core idea was, I want to have an alert, like a alarm bell that goes off in my system when we see the conditions to be right, that we're going to have the pipeline for, or the fuel or the territory for a new rep in this region at this segment in 6 months' time. Because 6 months is the time it's going to take us to advertise, interview, hire, train, and ramp. From today, in 6 months' time, that person will be exiting their ramp based on the ramp at the time. So, it was that kind of, okay, if we approach it from that angle and we say, I want the rep to hit the road at exactly the moment in time that the territory is beginning to overflow a little bit. And the better we can align up those times, the smoother it'll be for customers, the smoother it'll be for reps, and also the more satisfying an onboarding and ramping and ramping up process the reps will have. And I would say probably one of the bigger pieces of learning of the last 4 or 5 years is kind of how to measure that, how to measure that growth in your customers, in your territories, in your markets, and it probably involves kind of 10 to 15 different variables with different weights and them rolling around. But it's kind of like if you can crack it, you can really kind of lean into the growth then and push the numbers further than a lot of people in your own business would think is possible.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that sentiment, and it's interesting you say that. And anyone who knows US dollars will know there's a phrase on there, "In God we trust." And one of my sales leaders used to further that and say, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And I think that kind of, for me, highlights how today's world insists upon data. In fact, I remember one of my first roles as a sales leader where I was working in what was an on-prem business, and it was transitioning to somewhat of a SaaS play through acquisition, but not deliberately through legacy systems. And I sat down, and they hadn't hired a VP yet, and then the VP was hired probably 3 or 4 weeks behind me. But we used to go into our leadership meetings, and we would have a printed off PDF of the hiring plan, the org chart, right? And we would stick to the org chart and literally tick off who we'd hired or who our interview pipeline was behind that. And I turned around one day and I said, can you just show me the data points behind this? Where is it that we have allocated, actual market demand for these respective headcounts in these areas? And they said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, we have headcount." And they said, yeah, that's right. That's what our budget is telling us. And I said, "Okay, well, what's the data to support that budget?" And they hadn't quantified that. And I think that was a massive failing. And then similarly, that hiring plan played itself out to eventuality where we were sort of saying, well, we were carving up the product set. We had, 2 reps at one point for territory with adequate provision, and then suddenly we were allocating 2 reps for a territory that was performing to the level of 25%, and not surprisingly there was uproar. So that type of misalignment can actually hurt a business quite dramatically. I think one of the advantages of SaaS today is the fact that you can kind of predetermine demand ahead of time. I really very, very much like what you said, Mark, around that 6-month piece, where 6 months ahead of time where that'll look like. And you can predict this around your trial downloads, which is something SaaS lends itself to, etc. What other kind of data points have you used throughout your planning here? And I think an audio call doesn't really do it justice. I feel like it's a very visual, on the wall type of discussion to be had with all the humming parts, as it were, cogs in the machine. What other data points do you use, Mark? Is my question. And then what successes or perhaps failures or faux pas have you seen when this isn't done correctly?
Yeah. You're right. It's probably a whiteboard exercise, and I think there's a lot of my team. If any of my team take the time to listen to this, they'll be laughing because I usually have a whiteboard marker in my hand instead of my laptop a lot of the time. I think when you're looking at all of the territories, and obviously you're trying to plan the territories and carve them up in the best possible way. There's the hunting element, the net new and the new logos and stuff like that, and that's quite straightforward off lead flow, depending on how they're nurtured, and looking at pipeline creation rates and looking at close rates, and being able to have that data across all the different regions and the different segments, and if you can take it that far, industry specific stuff as well. On the other side, then we think about more the farming, the account management piece. Obviously, as customers mature with your product, not only do they consume more product, but they also consume more of everything. They consume more CSM time, they consume more support time, they consume kind of a lot of things, and it's about understanding kind of what they're consuming. What does a successful customer look like? So if we have customer A and customer B, and customer A is maybe 2 years ahead of customer B in terms of maturity in whatever it is, whether it's CRM in Salesforce, or it's project management software in Rike, or it's testing infrastructure at Browserstack. There's a maturity curve for all of your customers, and some of them are just starting out in their journey, and they're moving from they're coming out of spreadsheets into a first SaaS tool, and some of them are upgrading from an older tool or whatever. I think there's definitely there's a lot of markers within your existing customers that are often ignored, and from a high level, people think about, okay, what is the contract value for this customer? When is their renewal date? Are they happy or are they not? But underneath the surface there's a lot of data around kind of their usage and their adoption that on the surface falls into, CSM and renewal data, but actually it's sales data, because all data is sales data really at the end of the day. So I think the other metrics are really around tracking the usage and adoption, and then what's been really successful for my teams over the last few years is obviously tracking the, selling business to business is a people business, and tracking the people who are your champions, your change agents, your catalysts, and then ultimately your decision makers, and tracking their adoption. So one of the really interesting metrics that we often get probably A and B players to do, because they're the people who have the headspace to go and do it, is adding net new people into their, not only into their CRM as net new contacts, but getting net new people who matter to the business inside your product. And when you do that, you see massive uplifts, and you see lead flow improve. But that's one of the biggest drivers of expansions in our accounts. And we know then, so for example, if we say, can we add 5 net, director level contacts as net new people into our product per month, per quarter, whatever it might be, that can have a massive impact, because of all of the, it sets off a chain reaction on the customer side. And it's always just about, at a really basic level, what new energy can we bring to the account? And the biggest driver of new energy is always people who are catalysts for change within an organization. So, I mean, that's a snapshot of it. It's a much bigger topic. But did I answer your question?
No, I think so. I think that's quite clear, and I think, for me, you're almost guaranteed to have an issue if you don't go through at least a process. And I know your process is kind of Mark Rudden patent pending, but I think it's the fact that you have a process and a very clear handle on the data, which allows you to actually make decisions that are based on tangible insights into the business. So I think that's probably the crucial takeaway from my perspective. But just to shift gears here a small bit, Mark, I'm keen to dive into kind of sales philosophy a little bit more. And I know you've probably grown up in that born SaaS type of environment. I'm curious to know, from a sales methodology and training perspective, how have you, learned your craft through those very methodologies? And then how do you, as a leader, kind of teach others and lead others and share that philosophy to allow you to win? I know one of the takeaways I had from some of our conversations were the power of no, and saying no to somebody, and that, your product isn't a fit for everybody. But maybe you could share with us some of your sales philosophies, your trainings, and maybe some of your sales encounters. Don't obviously mention the prospects and client names, but maybe just share with us some examples as well off the back of those sales philosophies, if you would.
Yeah. Okay. I think moving into the SaaS world and going back to the Salesforce days, I think, I've always personally felt very comfortable as a salesperson, and I think, my personality and kind of my raw skills kind of match up quite well with being a sales professional. But I think moving into kind of sales leadership, it was a massive kind of almost like kick in the head that, the way I do things, is very personal to me, and that is not necessarily, scalable and coachable, or certainly not as much as I thought it would be. So I think I've definitely gone on a journey over the last 5 years, trying to understand trying to understand how, first of all, to get the kind of the sales fundamentals right, and then kind of when that solid foundation is in place, how to layer on some more of the advanced skills, and they will be the skills that take people out of the SMB and mid-market world and into the enterprise world, and all of the kind of different. It's a complex job, and I think when you think about what you ask a SaaS sales professional to do, and you break down all of the different things, the elements of their job, it's a pretty complex job. Of you need to know the product really well, you need to know your customer really well, you need to know all the operational stuff really well, you need to operate under pressure, you need to communicate effectively. I mean, there is a reason why the jobs are reasonably well paid. So when I think about the sales training, and this is interesting because as we sit here in mid-May 2020, we're doing a lot of our sales training remotely now. So we're continuing to hire at this time, but we're training people around the globe from home. So we're also thinking about how you train people when you don't have them in a room, and you need to onboard somebody on a sales playbook and on a product suite completely remotely, and that sales playbook needs to be really, really well defined. And I think what happened at Reich in kind of 2015, 16, 17, it was really an evolution of, that was my first experience of writing a playbook of, and that first version was how I sold Reich, and then trying to roll that out and trying to enable that and coach that across a team. And the playbook within 12 months was not recognizable from its original state. And also it needed to have lots of different nuances to it for regions and for industries. So I think the massive learning curve there was that I couldn't scale the way that I definitely couldn't scale the way that I do things. And that was a bit of a shock to the system, because then you think, well, how am I going to do this? From a sales philosophy point of view, I think a lot of there's a couple of ideas around it. I mean, there's well-worn paths around this. Companies use standard training. There's the Challenger sale. I think most of Dublin has been trained by John Barrows and Bachelor at this stage, but there's a lot of kind of really solid philosophies and theories out there. A couple that are personal to me are that, this idea that the sales cycle has a certain amount of work in it. There's a certain amount of energy or utility that needs to go into a sales cycle. And as a sales professional, you have the choice of whether you want to front load that or you want to put it all at the end. And that goes back to what you were saying a little bit earlier, Ross, about, that empowering kind of sales professionals who are under pressure, especially when they're under pressure, to say no, because and getting them to understand why that is. So by unloading all of the, I suppose, the more difficult parts of conversation of the sales cycle, getting a lot of the objections surfaced really early, and by making sure that really early on, how fast can we get to a go or no go part of the phase of the sales cycle. You're then uncovering all of the information you need to say, well, actually, no, this isn't a good fit for the customer or us or both. And that idea of, if you think about it on a whiteboard, it's kind of like this steep curve at the start, and then it flattens out and then it goes downhill. The really good sales professionals get all the hard work out of the way really early. And that way, when you hit the halfway point in the sales cycle, it's literally downhill from there. The expectations have been set. It's been very open and transparent. People are aware of what they're getting, what they're going to be paying for it. And you're really then just looking at the trial period, or the proof of concept period, or the pilot period, or whatever way you want to call it, or whatever way your sales structure is set up, that pilot or POC then is going to do the talking, and the success metrics that you've agreed at the very start either get met or they don't get met. But the deal is basically set up, ready to go, and it's an easy decision at the end. I think when salespeople skip some of the really direct, harder questions and uncover some of the, talk about the problems and the negatives of all of this stuff, of the product, or the implementation is going to be brutal. Your change management processes are not good enough, and we see a lot of risk in the way that you're going to adopt this product. For example, you can get to a much more trusted state a lot earlier with a customer, and just lay all your cards out on the table. Now, that's a much easier job when you have a great product in a good market, because then it's a numbers game. You're basically saying, we have a great product, but it's not for everybody. Let's get to a point where we can decide if a partnership here is a good thing. And where, the challenge I've had in the past has definitely been having more junior sales reps come in, and not maybe being mature enough to be able to, dig in and, dig in really early and uncover some of the less attractive parts of the sales process and our proposition in some cases. And then you get to a point where you've lots of deals in your pipeline. The hard work hasn't really started. And when we get towards the end of the sales cycle, customers start skipping meetings, they go dark, you can't get to the right person. The person you're talking to isn't a true champion or a change agent. They're not going to be able to go and sell internally. All of these problems start surfacing, and you end up with a pipeline that drags on and on and on and on, and close rates completely drop off.
I think it's because they go too fast, and I think it's an overzealous thing. It's an experience thing. You're spot on there that I've always encouraged our sales leaders to inculcate a philosophy to kind of slow down at the front end and speed up at the back, because that'll take deals will go, as you said, much faster at the back end, because you slow the whole process right down in terms of that qualification or discovery piece to really understand if there if there's a fit, if there's a challenge, to really understand the problems. Because in my experience, the biggest reason that deals get stalled later in the sales process is due to lack of alignment or lack of consensus on the customer side. Yeah. And that's purely because either you didn't have enough people involved, one person didn't know what the other person was doing, or it's fine that you can get consensus, because alignment is a tougher one than consensus, because people will kind of give you general consensus about anything. Should we meet tomorrow? And everybody, yeah, let's do that or whatever. But alignment is much harder to get. Yeah. Alignment points to, this is actually what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to do it, and we're completely aligned with that. In fact, we're all willing to spend a whole bunch of time and put our necks on the block to go in that direction. And that's something that doesn't happen overnight.
I completely agree with you about the slow down piece, and I remember that being drilled into me at Salesforce. And I think the slowing down to do the discovery and understand, the proper challenges. And it's the classic example of, you go into the doctor and you say you have a runny nose, and the doctor says, no, you don't have a runny nose, you have the flu. It's kind of like, hey, can you get past the symptoms to the proper illness underneath? But it's kind of like it's a nuance with that. When you get to that point where you've discovered, right, there is something significant that's worth solving here, or there's value that we can add. the classic sales pitch, especially when it's new business, when you're trying to capture a new customer, and they're typically talking to 2 or 3 other people, and they've done their homework. You know, the people arrive in the sales cycle, 60-70% of the way through it these days. So they've done a lot of their homework, but sitting down with the customer and saying, okay, we've identified that we can provide value, but here's all the shitty things that are going to happen. And here's all the problems that you have in your organization that we see, because we do this every day. And it looks to us like the team you've put together to evaluate this is, for example, might not have all of the core competencies that we would need on our side to make this a successful project.
That's perfect. I absolutely love that. And the reason I love that is salespeople think that they have to be on the back foot, that, their time is less valuable than somebody that they're trying to pitch or sell to or convince, right, that this is a really good idea. But the reality is the only two things that salespeople are really in control of is, where they spend their time. Mm-hmm. And when they decide to spend their time with somebody who they feel they can add value, what they say, what they actually say and what they ask, right? They're the only two things that salespeople are in control of, in my view. But the point is, there has to be some kind of, reciprocal contract there with salespeople. And I think the really good salespeople say that out front, and they say, hey, I'm going to spend some time with you. I'm going to absolutely bust my ass over here to try and help your organization to do X, Y, and Z to solve these problems that you told me about or whatever. But if I'm going to do that, here's what I'm going to need in return. I'll need you to connect me at some stage to this person and that person, and and you lay all of that out, and it's a reciprocal kind of arrangement. But it's really tough, isn't it, for new salespeople to kind of have that confidence and to have that understanding that it's very, very possible to establish those type of relationships.
Yeah, and hiring in Dublin, especially across EMEA, with all of the different languages and competencies that you need, as has been said on these podcasts before, the general demographic of Europeans coming to Dublin to work in SaaS is in the 25 to 35 bracket, because we don't typically have enterprise sales for European regions in Dublin. They're typically in the field. And secondly, people come when they're free to come. They're younger, they've less responsibility. Maybe, they're not tied down to the responsibilities of middle-aged life a lot of the time. And they're free to come and kind of get some great experience. Dublin's a great place to live, and have some fun. But what you have, really, this is where kind of sales management and sales leadership comes in, because you need to enable people to have the confidence to lead, that they can lean on the product, but they need to see you do this in front of them, and you need to tell them you're going to do it beforehand, and then you need to do it in front of them, and then you need to close the loop and talk to them about it afterwards. So this isn't a fluke. This didn't happen by accident. I'm telling you that I'm going to go and I'm going to challenge this customer on their ideas around this, and this. And the way that they want to roll out our product is not the right way. So either we're going to come to some sort of arrangement or we're not. And if we don't come to some sort of arrangement here, we're going to tell that customer that they're not a right fit, and we're going to recommend our competitor. And they look at you with two heads and say, well, what are you talking about? Well, we're going to recommend a competitor. And if they go with that competitor with the same attitude, with the same kind of, not attitude is the wrong word, but the same kind of roadmap that they were going to do with us, they're going to be up for renewal in a year's time, and we can go back at them again, because it's not going to work. So,
who's great at setting the tone with stuff like that are really, really good sales engineers. Pre-sales engineers, because they ask what I call the risk questions. They call people out on a certain process that maybe a sales guy or a BDO is afraid to ask, or actually doesn't even know how to ask, right? Because they they can't even get the depth of sometimes a technical situation or a solution kind of situation, and they won't ask a question like, well, why would you want to do it that way? Surely if you did that, you would get this, and then that wouldn't align with that. And, can you help me understand why you would want to do it? And, sometimes the customer is really, really thankful, or the prospect is really thankful that you help them go in and solve something, or at least think about something that they hadn't been thinking about before. And I think that's the key to it. I think that's the really key. So look, I've one more question, and it is this: we've spoken about the markets and the segmentation strategy piece, kind of what I call where the bus is going, and again about aligning the right people to those markets. So that's who's on the bus. So in terms of the seating arrangements on the bus, how do you decide what sales org model or structure, that would be best to go after those markets with the people that you have on your plan, or the people you plan to have? So, for example, some people have a hunter-farmer approach. Some people, go to market by market segment. Some people have hubs of BDRs and inside salespeople and customer success, and they all operate in a group, which is personally one of my favorites. Or you can have a decentralized inside sales model or centralized model. How do you guys decide what structure is best for the organization to be able to leverage all of the potential demand that has been created in those markets?
It's a never-ending job.
Give us the short answer, because we're running out of
I'll certainly give you as short as I possibly can. So
okay.
I think there are. So first of all, that plan for this year might be different next year, in the same way as the people we need right now at a certain level mightn't be the people we need in 3 years' time. So it is constantly evolving.
What's working for you now? What kind of structures?
I think it comes down to what extent is the balance between land and expand. That's the way I think about it anyway. So, for example, if the land is quite small, and it's more of the expansion is the bigger part of it. I think the hunter-farmer model works really well, because you need people, high volume, high velocity people, getting customers over the line, and then be picked up by professional services, customer success, account management, support, billing, all of that kind of stuff, and really just be implemented. Where that, if you think about a standard SaaS contract starts off at 12 months, there's very few companies who come in and say, we're going to go 3 to 4 to 5 years contract with you guys, when they haven't even adopted it yet. It's still a bit of a pipe dream. So I'm a big fan of people focused on getting those people over the line. Just get them over the line, and then we'll deal with them when they're over the line, and we'll figure it out, because we need to get the 30, 60, 90 days implementation really right, so that when they hit 6 months, not only is the renewal locked in at 6 months, there's an expansion in the 6 to 12 months period. That's really, personally, I've had a huge amount of success with that. I think talking to kind of people in my network in other companies, there's a lot of companies where, if you think about large, somebody like App Dynamics, something like that, the initial sale can be, 80 to 90% of the total size of the spend. So when the initial sale is so big, it's kind of, you're more just into a customer success and renewals flow afterwards. There isn't a huge amount more account management to be done. It's really just maintaining it, making sure they're using it, and the product roadmap lands as it comes online, that kind of thing. So when I think about, Reich is a classic land and expand, and so is Browserstack. And I think that's what's, I've certainly been drawn to Browserstack, because I know I can implement a lot of what was very successful at Reich in Browserstack, even though it's front end to back end, and even though it's kind of, you know, selling to marketing teams and professional services teams, as opposed to engineering teams. So yeah, to answer your question simply, I think it's like, if you think about your product and your market and your customers and how it gets implemented, adopted, and does it, you know, how much of it are you biting off in the first sale, as opposed to, is it a case of what they spend with us this year, we think we can do 3x the following year, because if we show value, it'll organically grow within their business.
I think you've made a really, really good point there in the SaaS world about there's still some fuel in the tank as such when you have that initial sale across the line, and I've seen SaaS products fail for that very reason, that it's very fixed, maybe on an infrastructure environment where it's node-based licensing or some such derivation of that. There are literally hundreds of licensing models, but when you're out at a situation where your organization can perpetually get value from this, it's actually quite a transformational product that adds a different way of working, which isn't for everybody. And I think that's a key point too, is that it's very powerful to say to somebody that this is not a product that may suit you and it's not for everyone, but let's have that discussion together. So I suppose as a segue, Mark, could you share with us maybe what is Browserstack, where does it play, and kind of what its trajectory and where do you see that going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm incredibly excited to have joined Browserstack at this time. Browserstack has been around since 2011, and Browserstack is, you know, its mission is to make the developers' lives easier. So what that means is it's a testing platform that helps people deliver better websites and better mobile applications. So we've about 25,000 customers, and some of the biggest companies in the world rely on Browserstack to push product faster and with better coverage. So I think, you know, what sets Browserstack apart, I'd be lying if I said I understood Browserstack's market and its offering before they approached me, but I think the last 6 months have been a whirlwind tour, and certainly it's something that as the global economy becomes more digital, and obviously we live in strange times right now where that digital you know, move, the on-prem versus cloud conversation is certainly getting accelerated at the moment. But if you think about the challenges that engineering teams have right now, they need to move faster and faster and faster. And one of the reasons Browserstack was set up was that, you know, our founders had an IT consultancy company and had a number of different companies going, and every time they built, you know, a website for a customer, the time to build a website kept coming down, but the time to test that website, like, before you put it into production, wasn't going anywhere. And the big push now is it's a classic well-trodden path of kind of on-prem to cloud. So if you think about how people have been testing websites and mobile applications, it's by plugging in devices in their offices and just running tests. And what Browserstack offers, and what is pretty unique to Browserstack, is that we offer real devices in our data centers. So if you want to test your website or your mobile application, when you open up Browserstack, what you're really doing is you're logging into a real clean, brand new device in a data center, pretty much in any continent you want, and you can run all of those tests there. And one of the big differentiators is that we only use real devices. We don't use emulators or anything like that as simulators. And because of that, we're being really successful with the enterprise, and especially with businesses who rely on websites and mobile applications for a lot of revenue. Because, you know, one of the really big issues for engineering teams right now is that the amount of devices that the public are using across across all of the versions just keeps growing. An idea called fragmentation. So when 10 years ago, you used all you had to do was test on an iPhone, and that was it. Well, right now, there's 2,000 different devices out there, and if you're a really large company that depends on these type of channels for revenue, having a blind spot in there can be a really big issue. So yeah, that's what Browserstack does, and founded in Mumbai, Indian founded company. We have an office in San Francisco for the last number of years, and a new office in Dublin now, to really kind of serve the EMEA customers. We have thousands of customers across Europe. We've hundreds of customers in Dublin, so we're really interested in being part of the testing community here in Dublin, and yeah, we're obviously before my time, but we're Series A backed by Accel Ventures. Anybody who knows their VCs knows where Accel Ventures land in the overall picture, and they've certainly kind of put their money where their mouth is and made a sizable investment into Browserstack to fund that growth. So yeah, exciting times ahead. We're looking to scale the office in EMEA over the next 3 years, and certainly looking for smart, driven, good humans to come and join us.
Well, I suppose as you kind of pitch to that audience, and maybe other multinationals who are thinking of coming here to Dublin and Ireland as a whole, one of the questions we like to ask as we wrap up is the crack. How would you describe the crack to potentials looking to come into Dublin? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think I'm biased because I'm born and raised in Dublin, and I'm a very proud Dubliner. But I think, when I think about having been with Reich through that journey from 2015 through to the end of 2019, the people. So first of all, the people who came to Dublin in order to set up Reich, I think Dublin has left an indelible mark on them. And then, one of the great things about Dublin is that the tech community is in such a mature state. It's a global center of excellence for technology now at this stage, and you can set up a company, set up an office in Dublin, and you can hire every nationality and language and skill set that you need from a 5-mile radius. I mean, that's a pretty kind of attractive proposition. Obviously there's financial and tax incentives for that as well, but I think the network, Dublin isn't really a city. It's a large town, and that kind of environment lends itself, I think, to networking. It lends itself to just a great atmosphere for the industry in the city, and certainly kind of former colleagues and existing colleagues of mine that have come from the US and come from Russia and India and all over, and customers as well. I mean, we invite a lot of customers to Dublin to come and spend time in our office. The common consensus is that it's great crack. Like, it's kind of like you get a lot of work done. There's a lot of talent there, but there's certainly a more relaxed feel to Dublin, I think, than a lot of other European cities, inside work and outside work. So you kind of have there's also the youngest workforce in Europe, and free third level, semi-free third level education, and obviously we're pretty well aligned with the US, and we speak English. So when you put all of those into the melting pot together, it's certainly a fantastic place to launch any SaaS business. Yeah.
That's a great summarization. And I think myself and yourself, Mark, may well have pretty safe, secure careers in the IDA in the future, should we ever wish to avail of them with that kind of summarization. I really want to thank you for that call today around your insights you shared, and definitely some great takeaways for our listeners. So yeah, very much thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, guys. Pleasure.
Thanks, Mark. Be safe.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.